startups. Here with me is Lord Simon Jacobs. Is the professional is the CEO of Professional Weirdos. He's also the governor of a children's hospital. And so we're going to be talking about what it means to be a professional weirdo, why that is important, and why entrepreneurs especially should start taking that on board now. So without further ado, let's bring Simon on. I beg your pardon. I mean Lord Simon on.
That's right, Tulu. You better get that right. No, I'm
So
joking,
Lord
of course.
Simon, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. Yeah, lovely day, lovely Friday. You know, just about to start the weekend. So yeah, I'm great. How about yourself?
Indeed. I mean, we're all looking forward to the weekend, aren't we? Well, we don't have the same expectation of the weekend as we used to pre-COVID-19, right? Everybody, leaves work at maybe like 4:30. When you leave work cheekily at 4:30 when you're supposed to leave work at 6. But now you're at home, right? Home is now work, right? So it's like I say, you can no longer tell the difference. You can no longer tell the distinction, right? But I mean, the weekend is still weekend. You get time to spend with the family, and hey, it's still sunny, right? That's a good thing.
Exactly. I think more than anything for me, what I've tended to do in terms of weekends is that it's less. You know, Monday to Friday, I will do more work than Saturday and Sunday, and that's my differentiation.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, and it's good that distinction is there, because you need to have family time. You have to have you time. Sometimes we can make our professional life roll into our personal life, and that's not very healthy, is it?
Yeah. Oh no, it's very easy to do when you're at the office anyway. So when you're working from home, it's even easier to let that happen. You know, just think, oh, I'll do a bit more, and then all of a sudden the weekend's gone. You haven't had a break, and as we'll come on to, it's really important to let your mind have that rest. So yeah, absolutely. If nothing else, try and be a bit more disciplined with your weekends is one piece of advice, definitely.
Very, very key. Very, very key. I mean, so Simon, so let's just go right into it. In terms of, can you just give us a kind of a good understanding of your background? What led to you becoming the professional weirdo that you are? And what has led to to you going down the entrepreneurial route?
Sure, good question. I'll try and make this as snappy as possible, because it can be a fairly long story. But I mean, you asked about how I became a professional weirdo, and this story will give you a bit of a glimpse. I think fundamentally there is a professional weirdo within all of us. I think that's important to say. But I think what I've done is let mine out a bit more, shall we say? So I'll give you some examples. So I was quite shy up until I was about 15 or 16. And then I read a book by Danny Wallace, and you might have seen the film. It's called Yes Man.
Oh yeah.
So the book that the film is based on is called Yes Man by a guy called Danny Wallace. He's British, and he told the story about how he was down and out in life, basically, and all of a sudden he met this guy on the bus, and he was telling him his woes, and the guy on the bus said, "You need to say yes more." And Danny took that to heart, and then went on basically a spree of yeses for about a year, and wrote a diary about what happened. And his life, without being too cliche, kind of changed. So, he was doing some amazing things, some really interesting things. And I don't think he wrote it as a self-help book, but I read it and took it as a self-help book, essentially. I started saying yes to more things. And at that point in my life, I was 15, 16. It should have been, highlight in terms of social stuff. And I realized that I was saying no to a lot of things, mainly out of like social awkwardness. And you don't realize until that's pointed out to you that that's the case. So started saying yes, and that kind of opened up my world a bit. And I did things like drama, which I wouldn't have ordinarily done. Got outside my comfort zone. Started my first venture, I suppose you'd call it. So at the time, I was looking for my first car, and the internet wasn't what it is today. This was 12 years ago now, and there was no advice for first-time drivers. There was no advice for first-time buyers of cars, insurance, etc. So I thought, all right, well, I'll go through the experience and write about it. So I started a blog, wrote about that. The blog kind of snowballed in the school that I was in, became like a gossip column, and eventually it got shut down by the headmaster. Essentially, I got told off about it because there were some less than favourable things about teachers on there, which, if I'm honest, the old Simon, shall we call him, the shy one, wouldn't have liked that. But actually, I realized that I quite liked rocking the boat once I got told off. I liked the notoriety. So that was a really key lesson, really key thing for me to remember. So that's one element of becoming a professional weirdo. It's like to challenge and to recognize that status quo. I was doing this because I thought it was fun, and I was putting it out there into the world. And that's one key important thing. Then I went to university. I was studying international business. I thought I'd be this high flying management consultant. And the first year of university it was essentially a repeat of A-level business. The course that I went on, it wasn't a requirement for you to have business A-level, basically, which is fine, if that's how they want to do it. No qualms about that. But for me, the first year was a bit boring, so I sunk myself into the extracurricular activities, shall we say. I went out every night. I was going to all different societies, just throwing my hat in the ring and everything. And one of the things I wanted to get involved in was the magazine at the university. Going back to my blog, I like the journalism side of it. But the magazine wasn't running when I got there. And so over the summer of my first year, I cooked up the idea to start my own magazine. And I came up with the name You Need to Know. So UNI number 2 KNOW, play on words being you need to. And I sent out an email to some journalism students, some design students, and said, look, I'm starting this thing. Would you be interested in getting involved? And I booked a room for about 5 different people, a room big enough for 5 people, and about 50 people turned up. And that's when I thought, oh, well, I must be onto something at least. So we came up with this idea, what it was going to look like, what it was going to be. It was essentially going to be, like my blog. It was going to be like a gossip column for the university. It was going to tell you what's going on there, what's going on where, club nights, etc. And it would be free to students, and I would put advertising in it to cover the cost, basically. So I went out and sold advertising, which was the most grueling and awful week of my life. Yeah. I'd never done sales before, never sold a magazine before. I was doing everything that I was doing was kind of done out of naivety. I didn't know anything, and therefore there was nothing to corrupt my mind in terms of how to do it. I just learned by doing. And this is another thing that entrepreneurs and professional weirdoism is, going out exploring, putting stuff out there, and being confident in what you're putting out there, and being confident putting out there. So anyway, raised enough money to print the first edition of the magazine. It went well. Again, got in trouble with the heads of the university. They didn't like that I'd put Nottingham Trent University on the front of the magazine, which I thought was a bit short-sighted, but there we go. Can't complain about that too much. And then I entered a local Dragon's Den style competition for some money for a grant. And one of the dragons on the panel wanted to invest in the magazine and in the business further. And we had another business partner who was doing some interesting things with student housing. And the three of us kind of formed a group. So we formed the Uni 2 group. And the idea was that the magazine and the club nights would essentially act as the Trojan horse for us to get into students' lives, basically. And then we would make our big cash from the rental side of the market. So after about a year or so, we were one of, if not the top student lettings agency in Nottingham. And because we had access to students, we were students, we understood what was going on. And various things happened along the way. So, we did some fun publicity stunts. Some things went well, some things didn't go well. As is always the case in business. We raised investment to create an app for Microsoft and some VC companies as well, which was, again, a trial by fire, things we'd never done before. We were developing an app, and I was kind of the lead on that project. My two other business partners didn't really know much about technology, and I knew a fair bit, but I didn't know anything about apps, so I was kind of like the one-eyed man leading the blind there, which was fun. The app ended up not working. We spent almost £250,000 on an app that didn't work. So that was a learning experience, shall we say? And by the end of that journey, so that was about 3 or 4 years down the line in terms of the business. I'd graduated, and the business wasn't going how we'd anticipated originally. We'd spent a lot of money on stuff that hadn't worked. We still had a very good business in Nottingham, but we'd envisaged having a UK-wide brand. And that wasn't turning out to be so easy. At which point I sort of thought, well, I'm not so interested in the Nottingham side of stuff. I've done what I can. I'll step back and let the other two, run that side of the business. and became a silent partner essentially. At which point I wanted to see where I was in the job market. I thought, you know, marketing was my thing. So I sent out some CVs to some marketing agencies thinking, oh, I'm this young 21, 22-year-old with this vast array of experience. I'll be snapped up in a second. And that wasn't the case. You know, I didn't get a single reply from any of the CVs I sent out. So I had another sort of moment, you know, walking around in my room in like deep despair. What do I do now? You know, my ego's flattened. I thought, well, what do marketing agencies want to see? You know, they want to see who you are. They want to see what it's going to be like to have you in the office. And they want to see that you can market. And fundamentally, you have to market yourself when you're putting your CV out there. And so I decided to get some face masks of myself printed and get my CV printed on the back of them and sent them out and said, here, this is how you can imagine having me in the office with you. And I was a bit more strategic with who I sent it to as well. And the week after, I got some calls and emails and said, look, we'd be interested in having a chat with you. At which point my ego went, Simon, you don't need a job. You're clearly already good at this. So at that point, I thought, all right, well, I'm going to try and do some marketing consultancy. And again, I wanted to do things a bit differently to how the market had already been run. So when I'd worked with marketing agencies previously with other companies, they hadn't been that interested in how successful the business that they were working with was going to be. You know, the only advantage to them of the business being the business they were helping doing better is that they'd come back for more work. But I always thought there was an opportunity to be a marketing agency, to be a marketing person, and be invested in the companies you work with, quite literally. So I developed a concept that where, you know, I would offer my services for reduced fees in return for profit shares, revenue shares, equity shares. So I had skin in the game. It showed I was interested, and also companies could afford me. And that's what I did for about 9 months. Won a few clients, won a couple of small awards, which was really good. And then about 9 months down the line, I got contacted by Camelot, the lottery company, and they were bringing in a new wave of youth into the company, and they were interested in bringing people from different backgrounds. And they said, "Would you be interested?" And I snapped the hand off essentially, and moved down to London. Was essentially like a youth consultant. I did things differently again. That, you know, the other young people, I think I was the only one from like the startup background. Quickly made a name for myself, became brand manager. So was thrown into like the C-suite level stuff, and it just wasn't for me. The stuff that I'd done to date didn't match what they wanted me to do with this role. I was told to be creative when in reality it was much more corporate. So after about 6 months, I decided to leave. Sold my shares in my university company to one of my business partners, gave myself some breathing room to stay in London and just find what I wanted to do next. And then it was really through a chat, through a friend, where I discovered this idea, Professional Weirdos. And she said these fateful words, "Simon, you're a bit weird." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, if you look at your history, if you look at the stuff that you've done to date, you've done things that are outside of the box, you know, outside the norm. Every time, you know, I tell my friends I'm doing something, like, what are you doing? Like, that's not normal." And I take that as a good hint that I'm onto something.
Yeah.
And she said, if you can bottle that in some way, there's value to it. And that's where I came up with the concept essentially for Professional Weirdos, which was I want to find other people who think differently to me. I want to help them. And also I want to help other people who haven't quite found this Professional Weirdo side, and businesses that kind of need that help in terms of spotting that creativity. And so that's what I've been working on for the past 2 or 3 years. And yeah, that brings us kind of up to date of where we're up to. Sorry for the long context, but
No, that's fine.
I think it helps.
Yeah, it does actually, because you said a lot there, and just to kind of narrow it down, because I think there are a lot of insights that you've actually provided there. So the first thing is your relation with the Yes Man movie, right? And it's actually very interesting that you've kind of given a different twist to the concept of being a yes man. So I mean, the previous concept of being a yes man might be, don't just be a follower, or just don't be afraid to challenge the norm and things like that. But a yes man actually is not being afraid to put yourself out there, right? A yes man or a yes woman, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. And that's what a professional weirdo, from what you're saying, is, right? So weirdo is not in the sense that you are weird in the stereotypical way of thinking
Correct.
about weirdness. Weirdness in the sense that you are comfortable with your difference, you are comfortable with your uniqueness. I think that's a better way of phrasing it. You are accepting of your uniqueness, and you are confident enough to demonstrate your uniqueness wherever you are. And I think that is very, very important, especially in an ever changing world where there is so much uncertainty. You know, nobody knew a year of this time last year that this is where we're going to be this year, right? You know, everybody who had planned, for example, maybe they've moved from one job to the other and now they're out of a job. You know, so it's kind of very interesting. So why is it important though for, especially as a business owner, for you yourself to be a professional weirdo?
That's a really good question. Also, really good points there, Tolu. I completely agree. I think it's what you said is bang on in terms of it's not a weirdo in the sense of, you know, the people who like hang around like near caves and stuff, or whatever your stereotypical understanding of weirdo is. That's not what we imply with professional weirdos. It is those people who think differently, challenge the status quo, and those people who go, that's a strange idea, that's outside the box. That's how we would define weirdo in terms of professional weirdos. In terms of your question, you know, why is it important to be a professional weirdo within entrepreneurship? I would say there are 5 or 6 key elements to that. The first is being an entrepreneur. You have to be keen to explore. So that's both in terms of finding what you want to be entrepreneurial about. So before you find that thing that you want to start, before you find that business, you have to have gone out there and seen the market. You know, you have to have spotted that thing. And exploring it isn't just a case of going out there; it's also seeing it. And that's what entrepreneurs do. They spot things. You know, normal people, non-entrepreneurs, will walk down a path and not see, you know, a different way of going. Whereas entrepreneurs will spot that and take that path. That's what exploring is. Next is creativity and challenging. So you might spot that thing, but it's also understanding how to utilize it. It's also understanding how you can use it and challenge the status quo. So if you are going down a path and spot something, it's getting other people to join you with it as well.
Indeed.
Next is confidence. So the one of the key parts of being a professional weirdo is the professional element. So you have to be professional and confident in your weirdness and put it out there. So it's all well and good having these great ideas, being able to, you know, spot them and being able to formulate plans. But if you don't put things out there into the world, you'll never make them so. You know, there are dime dozen, 1,000,001 different entrepreneurs, innovators, etc., who, you know, are still working on their thing in their parents' garage, which is absolutely fine. Tinker away, get it right, but make sure you put it out there. Have that confidence in you to put that thing out there. Until you do, the world won't know about it, and therefore you won't go forward. And finally, it's kind of repeat. So it's all well and good doing these things once, but if you only do them once, you'll get stuck. So make sure you're constantly going through that cycle of exploring, being creative, challenging, confidence, and putting it out there. And that for me is kind of what Professional Weirdos is all about. Those are the 4 or 5 key pillars in professional weirdoism, and I think that's why it's important to have that within entrepreneurship.
Amazing. I mean, so in terms of, so you've spoken about the ability to explore, the ability, you know, to spot something and to be able to identify a new opportunity. You also spoke about the leadership aspect of it, to be able to get people to trust that vision enough to want to follow it, and being confident to put yourself out there and so on. So, but how can an entrepreneur also kind of replicate that in their own employees? Because one of the would I say noticeably dominant traits in entrepreneurs is that they tend to be like what somebody defined as one man with 1,000 helpers, right? So you have you have people who are just doing your bidding. You've kind of created a template, even though sometimes you might say that, oh, we are still figuring things out as we go, but there is no real room for flex. There's no real room for creativity. There's no real room for people to be able to take ownership of what you have given them and find their own way in that context of, obviously with accountability and things like that. But how can an entrepreneur create that professional weirdo culture or an enterprising culture in their own organization? Something that they have to do. How can they replicate that in their own employees?
Great question. Absolutely incredible question. And I think I'm gonna offer a fairly wishy-washy answer in the sense that it is subjective. So I think it does depend on what you're trying to build and what you're trying to achieve. So if, for example, you are trying to build, let's say a technology company, well, if you're looking to build an app company, either the ones that build apps for other companies or one that builds apps to put out there into the marketplace, you are going to need a crosshatch of different people. So you're going to need people who are developers and who don't mind not being professional weirdos. So I would say that you don't need all of your employees to be professional weirdos. You need them to be scattered about. And there are a few structures that you can implement in order to do that. I mean, Google is a really good example of how they used to, at least. So they had the 20% rule, which was 20% of the people's working week was devoted to a project that they really loved and they were interested in. You know, we can look at how Gmail was started back because of that principle, and various other apps were started. So it's the way that you set the business up, and it's also being willing to try things. So it has to come from the top. So they have to recognize that you are willing to be challenged. So you need to set that up from the top. And also another thing is, when you are hiring, that's a huge step. And something that I hope to do in the future with Professional Weirdos, for example, is have an unusual hiring experience. So people actively have to come and find the job, for example. You know, you can implement these entrepreneurial traits along the way. So if you make the journey interesting from the start, you can already get those people who are intrigued. So, for example, I would have a treasure hunt style experience for people to eventually find the job. I wouldn't just put a job on Indeed or LinkedIn, for example. I would do something a bit more experiential, add to it, show the flavor right from the off, be interesting from the beginning. And another thing, this is a personal preference, and I don't know whether it works for everyone. I don't know whether it works for entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs typically like to have ownership of something. And therefore, the way that I will structure my businesses in the future and continually is to offer ownership of some form, shares, profit shares, etc. Encourage them so that they own a part of it and they are encouraged by that. And I think that's a really good scheme to go into it. So, whilst the answer isn't clear, and I think it's because it has to be specific to the business, it has to be specific to the entrepreneur. There are various things that you could have a look at least, and those would be a few of them.
Yeah, and I think you're very right. It is very subjective, right? And it's subjective to rules. There are some roles that need to be command and control.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do, and that's how you have to do it because of what is at stake. I mean, you cannot have an enterprising army, right? They need to take instructions from the general, unless people are going to die. You understand what I mean? And the same thing when it comes to DevOps, they can't really, you have to limit the enterprising side of things, even though you want them to feel free to also challenge as well. But in terms of, especially for startups, it seems like there needs to be, and I don't know if you agree with this, Simon, but it seems like for them to actually encourage that enterprising spirit, there needs to be some form of mature leadership. And the reason is because sometimes some of the people who are actually starting up businesses, especially in this era, are millennials. So people who are younger than 40. So some of them have not really had, some of them have had good life experiences, but some of them may not have. But also they've forgotten the mindset with which they've started, and also they've kind of like, even though they're offering shares and things like that, the real ownership is still missing, in that I can't really say that this is my work. So how can a company actually develop that mindset where even if you're not given shares, for example, for somebody to actually come into work and then say that I am coming to do my work, I have ownership of that, and that ownership is being supported by the leadership of the company?
Good question. Good question. Let me think about that. I mean, I read a really good book actually that I'd highly recommend. It was called Creativity Inc. I think we might have discussed it. Creativity Inc. about Pixar. It's by Ed Catmull, who I think he still is the head of Pixar, and he talks about this a lot. You know, he talks about how you give specifically creative people the ownership of their roles, and it's about empowering that from the very start. So as I said before, it's about getting the right hires, and making sure that you act swiftly, making sure that they have a voice, making sure that the teams are both big and small enough so that things can get done, but also ideas can be generated within those groups. In terms of ownership side of things, it's a culture, and you need to embrace it from the very core, from the high ups. So if you are an entrepreneur with a business, you need to really look inwards from yourself first, I would say, and recognize any downfalls, any issues you have, because that gets reflected out into the company. If for example someone comes to you with an idea and you don't respond to it in the right way, that has a ripple effect. Exactly. That is not to say that you are in the wrong, but you have a ripple effect of what you put out into the company. So it's about making sure that if you are the head honcho, if you are the person in charge, you are constantly improving as well. You are leading the company, but at the same time you are in constant development, and that's important to realize. You know, a lot of people that I've met in startup world, who eventually go on to, well, not fail's the wrong word, but don't succeed how they want to. It's mainly because they don't change. You know, they stick too much to their program, their mindsets, and don't allow themselves to shift. So the biggest piece of advice that I can give to entrepreneurs who are starting businesses, looking to hire, is to constantly look to grow and actually grow, not just read books and think you're growing, but actually embrace the challenges. So yeah, that would be my biggest key in terms of ensuring that you have the entrepreneurial spirit within the business. Make sure that you embody it.
Yeah, I think it's all about being agile, right? Being quick to adapt, be quick to change. You know, being willing, being accepting of challenges as well, and not just waving a title around, but being willing to be challenged and having that, even though there needs to be structure, but having a flat approach to management where people from different walks of the business can actually bring up an idea and it to be taken seriously. However, with that said, though, most startups are always conscious of budget, right? You have to be bootstrapped in order for you to prove to VCs that you are a worthwhile investment. You know, when you're doing your Series A, Series B funding and so on, they want to see how have you managed your books, right? And as a result of that, there is really very limited room for mistakes. So perhaps that is where the command and control side of things may become very, very important. But how then can a startup who may not have the same ability to pay as maybe as a McKinsey or BCG or any other corporation, but attract talent as well, but still kind of maintain the risk that may come from being enterprising? How can they balance? How can they kind of reach that equilibrium?
Good question. Just something I want to come back on before I answer that. As an entrepreneur, my point of view is that I am not an expert. I'm not. I don't think I'm an expert in anything in particular. I've got experiences in various different things, and therefore, when you fill your company, when you hire, you are hiring. You are trying to hire people who are experts or who do know. So be open to their suggestions. Be open to listen to them. You know, if you're hiring developers, get ready for their feedback, you know, and welcome that feedback. Now, moving on to your question about how to attract that talent, especially if you're competing on salary, for example. And I think actually this is a huge opportunity right now. If you are in a position where you are looking to hire, emphasize the other sides other than just the money. And this is a good opportunity for two reasons. One, the world is a mad place at the moment. it's been a mad place for ages, but even now, particularly, the world
Yeah,
has shifted massively. People
yeah,
are looking deeply at their lives. They are looking at what they can change. They are, things are not how they used to be. You're working from home. Your job security is probably limited, and therefore, whilst you may have used to have worked 9 to 5 and slaved for that, and worked that corporate lifestyle, that has changed massively. And so people are looking at that. So if you can offer them something other than the 9 to 5 way of life, and you can offer them a different way of doing things, then that is going to be very attractive. Let's look at London, because it's a prime example of where startups typically happened. That salary that you used to get at McKinsey, for example, will have contributed to some extent, or to a rather a large extent, your rent, your travel, and various other parts of being in London itself. That cost is there. Whereas now, if you're working from home, you can afford to earn a little less, but work for a company that's much more flexible and has a lot more future for you. If you get in on the ground level, you have so much more going for you. Look, all the people who got on the ground level in Facebook, Google, etc., all the big ones. So as an entrepreneur, as someone starting a business, it is your responsibility to make sure that you emphasize those things, and make sure that you build a culture that people want to be a part of. And look, if someone isn't interested in that side of things, if all they want is money, then you have to consider whether or not they're a right fit.
yeah.
And that's it. You both have to be able to walk away from the table, and that is a key of negotiation, full stop. If you're not willing to walk away, then you're both going to lose. And that's not me saying, by the way, that you shouldn't hire someone just because they want money, because actually sometimes they are the best.
Yeah.
But it's just making sure that you look at all the angles, and in terms of reaching that talent, do things differently in line with your culture, in line with your brand. Make sure that goes out across everything that you do. Like I was saying before, with the hiring process that I intend to do in the future, it won't just be sticking a job on Indeed. It'll be so much more than that. And if your business is about more than just being a 9 to 5, put that throughout everything you do.
Amazing. And it's not, yeah, even though the money might not be that important, but don't be afraid to pay well within reason.
Of course.
Make sure that whatever you're paying, it is sustainable as well. Okay, that makes sense. So, Simon, I'm conscious of time. So, do you have any last words or advice for entrepreneurs, how they can leverage the professional weirdo mindset?
Good question. Any last thoughts? I think the biggest thing for entrepreneurs, when I look back at my time being an entrepreneur, the experience that I've had is try your very hardest not to get lost in it. And what I mean by that is every day will bring you something new. Every day will bring you a challenge, will bring you a win, will bring you an experience. And that's really exciting. It's brilliant. Those are the joys of entrepreneurship. But as Tulu and I were talking about in the beginning, make sure you have time to yourself to reflect on that, to explore that within yourself, to recognize all the things that you're doing and you're achieving. Because without that, you'll wake up one day and have seen it gone by, and either you'll have been a success or maybe not to an extent, but the success is you actually doing it. And so my biggest piece of advice in terms of from professional weirdo side of things is to make sure you have those elements, make sure you have that explorative mindset, make sure you have that creative and challenge mindset, and take time outside of the business to reflect on those things. It's important for mental health. It's important for building a successful business. Whenever you read about any of the famous entrepreneurs, they've all done these things. They've all had these retreats for themselves, to recuperate. And something that we don't see a lot with entrepreneurs, at least, from the UK, is that ability to take a step back. So that would be my advice.
Amazing. And with that is also being able to trust people to be able to take your business forward in your absence as well. So that trust issue that most entrepreneurs have, that's something that they need to build very, very quickly when they've started a business. So I mean, guys, I think you've heard it from the Lord himself, the professional weirdo, that I hope that entrepreneurs out there, or even enterprising people, because I actually don't think that you need to start up a business to be an entrepreneur.
Agreed.
You can be an entrepreneur where you are working right now. So it's about having an enterprising mindset. So you've heard it all. So most important thing is for you to put this to action, and put it to action now. Until next time on the startups, please stay tuned for the announcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching today's episode of The Startups. It is my hope that has been both inspiring and insightful. Here at The Startups, we are committed to helping you to build successful and sustainable businesses that will provide the jobs for the future. This is why we are proud of our partnership with the Business Enablement Tool. It is a digital business consultant that helps you provide the ongoing support that you need to build a successful business. We're also committed to helping you to raise the capital that you need to actually take the first step to start your business. And that is why we are proud of our partnership with Transit Loan and the government-backed startup loan to help you to raise up to £25,000 in startup capital. For more information on this, please see the description below. To stay connected with us, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Please also hit the notification icon, the bell, so that you can always get notified once a new startup show comes out. Till next time, see you next week.